Hello everyone, this is Wei. Several months ago, in collaboration with Aroth, I released a video on how to create familiars, and I'm honored and humbled by the positive reception it has received. This video is linked in the description. In that video, I mentioned some late-breaking results that seem to indicate that in order to get the best chance of placing a specific legendary skill on a familiar, at least one of the input familiars must have a legendary version of that skill. After a lot more testing, I believe that we've cracked the code on how this process works, and the result is an easier method for creating endgame pets. Basically, ignore the section of the old video describing how to get specific skills on a familiar and replace it with this video. And here's how the process works. First, the game determines the quality of the familiar passive skills by rolling on a weighted table. Now, in the previous video, I showed these two tables that were from the in-game tooltips that show different skill quality probabilities depending on whether the familiar is a legendary familiar with an attribute over 170 or is a non-legendary familiar. However, these tables are for when conversion stones are not used. After a lot of math and experimentation, Wolf from the Aroth Discord server has mostly convinced me that when you use conversion stones, the tables for both legendary and non-legendary familiars become identical, as shown here. The Blizzard page with this data is linked in the description. This means that we probably don't need to place legendary attributes on the familiars we are converting, as I recommended in the previous video. So the game rolls on the weighted table as shown, and if you use conversion stones, the resulting familiar will be no worse than the best input familiar. In this example, the game rolls a 1 legendary, 2 rare familiar. In the next step, the game checks how many times a given skill appears on the input pets. If a skill appears on all 3 input pets, there will be an 80% chance that it will appear on the resulting familiar. If it only appears on 2 input pets, there will be a 40% chance that the skill will appear on the resulting familiar. However, and this is the key point, this will only work if there is a slot of the appropriate quality for that skill to go into. In this example, all 3 pets had lingering wounds, and one of them was legendary, so the game will have an 80% chance to slot lingering wounds into the open legendary slot. Similarly, all 3 pets have soul shield, and the highest quality version is rare, so the game would have an 80% chance to place a rare version of soul shield in a rare slot on the resulting familiar. However, only 2 input pets had tenacity, so there would only be a 40% chance that the game would try to place tenacity on the resulting familiar. Let's say the 40% rule succeeds. Then, since one of the tenacity skills is legendary, the game will try to place tenacity into a legendary slot, but no legendary slots are available. Remember, lingering wounds already took up the one available legendary slot, so the tenacity operation fails. The game does not place a rare or magic version of tenacity instead. The procedure just fails. After the game completes all of its 80% or 40% rolls related to the input familiar skills, the game then fills in any remaining open slots with random skills of the appropriate quality. It's in this step where players can wrongly fool themselves into thinking their choice of input pets had influenced the selections. For example, if a blue tenacity had appeared on the output familiar, many players would think that that was due to the 2 input familiars with a legendary tenacity and a magic tenacity, but that is not the case. There are only 12 skills that can appear in a magic slot, and there are 3 possible magic slots, so there's a 25% chance that a blue tenacity could appear on the familiar at random. The skills on the input familiars have no impact at this stage. Similarly, you might have 3 input familiars with magic tenacity and then get a legendary tenacity on the output familiar. If so, what happened was that tenacity missed its 80% roll in step 2, and then tenacity was randomly selected to appear in the legendary skill slot in step 3. And the more legendary skill slots on the familiar, the more likely this is going to happen. The skills on the input familiars will only affect skill selections during step 2 when the game makes the 80% and 40% rolls. During step 3, the selections are entirely random and the skills on the input familiars do not have any effect. Now let's look at a real in-game example. The resulting familiar has the same 1 legendary and 5 rare skills that the original familiar had. Meanwhile, the 3 input familiars have 5 overlapping skills among them. Let's assume that they all win their 80% or 40% rolls and predict what skills will show up on the resulting familiar and where. All 3 input familiars have Siphon, and the highest quality is rare, so it'll appear as a rare skill on the output familiar. All 3 also have Chain Reaction, and 1 is legendary, so it'll appear in the legendary skill slot. Bloodlust and Affliction appear on 2 familiars, with each having a rare quality skill, so both should appear as rare skills. And finally, 2 input familiars have Blindside, but both of them are magic skills, and there are no magic skill slots available, so this process will fail and Blindside will not appear. Now let's compare our prediction with the actual results. As you can see, all of the predictions turned out perfectly, except that Bloodlust must have lost its 40% roll. Now we're going to find out how best to place legendary versions of common skills onto our familiars. There are 12 skills that can appear as magic quality or better, 9 skills that can appear as rare or better, and 7 skills, plus some species-specific skills, that can only appear as legendary skills. When I talk about common skills, I mean those that can appear as magic or rare skills, which tend to be much cheaper to get. We'll discuss placing legendary-only skills on our familiars later. For our first example, I'll add legendary Lingering Wounds and Tenacity onto an Amalgam Skitterwhite to make this version of a PvE familiar. I should mention that I've gotten some pushback over these skill choices, with some people saying that they'd choose Soul Shield as the second skill and push Tenacity to the third slot. I can appreciate these arguments. Others go even further to say that Siphon should be the third skill over Tenacity, but I disagree with that. Tenacity allows for a cooldown time that is more closely aligned with legendary gems, and it allows Soul Shield to proc more often. Siphon would make a great fourth skill though. Regardless, I'll be making this Skitterwhite with Lingering Wounds and Tenacity. If you would prefer Soul Shield on your Skitterwhite, just use Soul Shield wherever I use Tenacity. Here's the process we're going to use to get legendary versions of common skills on our familiar. First, get an Amalgam version of the familiar species you want. Amalgam familiars have enhanced active skills, and when you convert using an Amalgam familiar, the result will always be an amalgam of the same species. This means that you can use input familiars of any species without the fear of changing the species of your familiar. I described how to make an amalgam familiar in the prior familiars video, which is linked in the description. Also, it's often possible to find amalgam familiars on the market for bargain prices. In my case, I happened to get an Amalgam Skitterwhite while doing some other conversions, so I already had one on hand as shown here. Now we need to figure out how many legendary skills we'll need. Alright, now it's time to talk about the elephant in the room. In my last video, I recommended getting 4 or 5 legendary skills on one's familiar before starting. Apparently, it's now a meme in some circles to say, I'm just 3 conversions away from my 5-skill familiar. What happened was that I had gotten 5 skills on my Skitterwhite fairly easily, and I had no idea how rare that was. In my defense, I had been getting feedback on the video for a couple of months and nobody had caught that mistake. At any rate, ignore that advice completely. In many ways, this whole video is designed to replace that section of the previous video. My new rule of thumb is this. Count the number of legendary skills you eventually want on your familiar. If you want 4 or more skills, or if one of the skills you want is a legendary only skill like Savior or Purification Flame, add 1 to the count. In this case, we just want 2 common legendary skills, so our count is 2, which the Skitterwhite already has. In step 3, we want to get rare or magical versions of the skills onto our familiar. I will explain why in step 4. In this case, the Skitterwhite, by luck, already has Lingering Wounds, so our focus will be on getting Tenacity onto our familiar while keeping the Lingering Wounds. I converted with 2 familiars that have both Lingering Wounds and Tenacity on them, being careful to make sure that there will likely be spots for them if they win their rolls. In this case, all 3 input familiars have rare lingering wounds, so there's an 80% chance lingering wounds will appear in a rare slot on the resulting familiar. Chain Reaction and Tenacity appear on 2 input familiars with rare versions of those skills. Since our Skitterwhite has 3 rare slots available for the 3 skills that could appear as rares, this should be fine. Finally, Precision has an 80% chance of appearing, but since all the input pets have magic versions of Precision, it'll appear as a magic skill on the resulting familiar, which we don't care about this time. So we'll have an 80% chance of keeping lingering wounds and a 40% chance of gaining tenacity, which is a 32% chance of getting both lingering wounds and tenacity on the resulting familiar. And we got our lingering wounds back, but tenacity lost its 40% roll, so we'll have to try again. I converted with another pair of familiars with lingering wounds and tenacity. Now, Razor Claws and Rejuvenate happen to be legendary on the Skitterwhite and also appear on the 2 other input pets. That's okay because we don't care about the legendary skill slots right now. We just want rare or magic lingering wounds and tenacity to appear on the familiar. Lingering Wounds has an 80% chance to show up as a rare skill, and Tenacity has a 40% chance to show up as a magic skill, which is fine because it would be the only one that can appear in the single magic slot. And this time it worked. We have rare Lingering Wounds and magic Tenacity on our pet. And finally, we'll convert with input pets that have legendary versions of the skills we want. Here, the Ash Sweeper has legendary Tenacity and rare Lingering Wounds. Meanwhile, the Merchant has legendary Lingering Wounds and blue Tenacity. This means our resulting familiar will have an 80% chance of getting legendary Lingering Wounds and an 80% chance of getting legendary Tenacity, or in other words, a 64% chance of getting both. Now you can see why we wanted to put rare or magic Lingering Wounds and Tenacity on the Skitterwhite in the previous step. Without that step, the odds of each skill showing up as a legendary would have been 40% each, or 16% for both. Since familiars with legendary skills tend to be expensive, quadrupling the chance of success is worth it. As an aside, I'm slightly concerned about the possibility that the Razor Claws might take away a legendary slot from the 2 skills that we want. However, it's my hypothesis that the game rolls in the order of the skills listed on the right, or at least that it rolls all 80% rolls before any 40% rolls. I don't have hard data to back up this assumption, but I believe it to be true. I don't think that the Razor Claws will get in the way. And as you can see, it worked. Now, what if you wanted to place a third common skill on a familiar? Let's say you now wanted to add Soul Shield to the Skitterwhite. If you have a 2 legendary skill familiar with 2 legendary skills you want to keep, consider the cheapest option of adding a rare version of the third skill that you want. In this case, using a rare Soul Shield will be about 1/3 of the strength of a legendary Soul Shield, but it's still very good. Alternatively, if you had chosen to have legendary Lingering Wounds and Soul Shield from the beginning, you could settle for a rare Tenacity at this step. Let's say I want to add a rare Soul Shield to my Skitterwhite at this stage. Then I need to convert my Skitterwhite with 2 other input familiars with Lingering Wounds, Tenacity, and Soul Shield, making sure that one of the Soul Shields is a rare version. The odds of complete success will be 26%. So that's what I did. And I got it on my 3rd try. But if you must have 3 legendary skills, you have a few options. The best option would have been to plan on having 3 legendary skills in the first place. If your Skitterwhite only has 1 or 2 legendary skills on it, convert with any familiar with 3 skills on it from the very beginning. Then follow the steps in the previous section to place the first 2 legendary skills on the familiar. If you didn't plan ahead though, like in our 2 legendary skills Skitter White example, you can convert with 1 familiar with any quality Lingering Wounds and Tenacity, and another 3 legendary skill familiar, preferably one that has any quality Lingering Wounds or Tenacity, or both on it. In the examples shown, I found a reasonably priced 3 legendary skill familiar with Tenacity on it, but no Lingering Wounds. The output familiar will be guaranteed to get 3 legendary skills and has an 80% chance to keep legendary Tenacity and a 40% chance to keep Lingering Wounds, or a 32% chance of keeping both. If you end up losing one or both of your preferred legendary skills, follow the steps in the previous section to get them back on your familiar. Finally, there's the last option, which is to repeatedly convert with familiars with Lingering Wounds and Tenacity of any quality until you luck out and get a 3rd legendary skill. The odds of keeping the legendary skills you already have and get 3 or more skills on your familiar is 2.9% per try. I do not recommend using this method. Using one of the previously described options, you should have a 3 legendary skill familiar with legendary Lingering Wounds and Tenacity on it. Then you'll need to convert with familiars that have all 3 skills, Lingering Wounds, Tenacity, and Soul Shield, of any quality. It is possible to find such familiars on the marketplace, although it may take checking the market often to find bargains. The goal here is to get a rare or magic version of Soul Shield on the familiar while not losing legendary Lingering Wounds or Tenacity. Note that if you do lose one of the legendary skills, you can always revert the conversion to get your original familiar back. After you have a blue or rare Soul Shield on the Skitter White, you can then convert using an input pet with a legendary Soul Shield and any quality Lingering Wounds and Tenacity, as well as a second input pet with all 3 skills of any quality. The odds of this conversion getting all 3 skills to be legendary will be 51%. If it fails, you can always revert the conversion and try again. Finding a familiar with legendary Soul Shield and any quality Lingering Wounds and Tenacity for Step 3 might be difficult to find or expensive to buy. Luckily, you can make one. First, buy a familiar with legendary Soul Shield. Then convert with familiars with any quality Soul Shield, Lingering Wounds, and Tenacity. Keep going until you get a familiar with legendary Soul Shield and any quality Lingering Wounds and Tenacity. Remember, if you lose your legendary Soul Shield along the way, you can always revert the conversion and try again. What if you want to place a 4th common skill on a familiar? For example, let's take my Pride and Joy Skitter White that already has legendary Lingering Wounds, Tenacity, and Soul Shield. Let's say I want to add legendary Siphon to it. Great! All we have to do is go to the market and buy up all the familiars that have any quality Lingering Wounds, Tenacity, Soul Shield, and Siphon. That shouldn't be hard. Oh, right. Theoretically, it's possible to put Siphon on a familiar using the same technique we've been using, but in 3 months of checking the market, I've only found 2 familiars with all 4 skills offered for anything approaching a reasonable price. So instead, I can hope for a little luck. By converting with familiars that have the 3 already existing skills, I'll have a 51% chance of keeping all 3 existing legendary skills. And then I can hope that one of the 2 remaining legendary slots randomly rolls a Siphon. If it fails, I can revert the conversion and try again. The combined odds of a successful conversion will be 4%, which means it would require 17 conversions to have a break-even chance of getting the conversion I want. That would be 17 conversions of 50 conversion stones each, plus the cost of all those familiars. Luckily, the situation isn't quite as hopeless as it sounds, because Siphon isn't the only top-tier choice for a 4th skill. Sure, Siphon will heal you. However, if your Skitter White has 200 insight, Phalanx will increase the player's damage by 9% for 4 seconds. And when I say 9%, I mean 9%, because Phalanx is in its own damage multiplier bucket, separate from damage increases from skills, gems, and the like. Also, ignition causes a burn on the enemy, which may not sound impressive, but since it's considered a status damage effect, your soul shield will be 50% to 100% stronger. The chances of getting any one of these skills as the fourth skill on our familiar is 11.5%, which means it would require 6 conversions to have a 50% chance of getting one of them. That is a much more reasonable long-term goal. So I'll convert my Skitterwhite with 2 familiars that have Lingering Wounds, Soul Shield, and Tenacity. Let's see how it goes. I got Siphon! Tenacity, Soul Shield. Oh no, no Lingering Wounds. Darn it. Let's try again. No top tier options, but I guess Steelhide is useful. I have enough of the correct input familiars for 4 more conversions. Let's see how they go. Lost Tenacity and got nothing interesting. Whoa, Siphon, but lost Soul Shield. Oh. So Lobber increases the familiar damage if there are no enemies within 3 yards of the player. I play a mostly summoner necro and tend to stand back from fights, so that's good for me. But I'll bet a lot of viewers see that Savior and are thinking I won the jackpot. And don't get me wrong, I think Savior's great too. However, there's a reason I didn't include it in the list of top tier skills I wanted to get. It's a general principle that the better your familiar is, the worse Savior gets. If Savior never triggers in a fight, then it's just a wasted skill slot. If it does trigger in a fight, then it disables all of the other skills for 75 seconds, meaning no Lingering Wounds or Soul Shield. I would rather have Siphon healing me and preventing me from dying in the first place, or Phalanx giving me a large damage boost. But still, Savior is a nice tier 2 skill that's good in a pinch. I have 1 more conversion available to try, but if I have to settle for this one, I'll be happy with this. And nothing interesting. So here's my final Skitterwhite. I didn't get any of the top tier 4th skills, but I'll be happy to make use of Savior for a long time. While we're at it, if you've enjoyed this video so far or found it helpful, please subscribe to the channel and like, comment, and share the video widely. It helps tremendously. The previous sections all dealt with getting legendary versions of common skills on one's familiar. What if instead you want to get skills that can only appear with legendary quality, like Savior or Purification Flame? I can't believe I'm showing this. Yes, there are some good lessons here, but it's so embarrassing. Alright, let's go. To demonstrate how to do this, I'm going to try to make this defensive PvP pet. It's an amalgam Ash Sweeper with Savior, the Prescience trait, and Concuss. I like this build because the AoE attack will debuff opponents, reducing the damage they deal to you by 20%. In addition, the Prescience trait will reduce the damage players deal to you by up to 3% with no cooldown. I hope to have a video out on traits before Winds of Winter is published. Finally, I like Concuss because it stuns opponents for half a second and can proc more than once in a cycle. It's not a strong stun, but it serves as an interrupt. Other useful PvP common skills are Steelhide and Tenacity. So let's try the same system we used to place common legendary skills on our familiars. Since we want 2 legendary skills, we'll want to create an amalgam Ash Sweeper with 2 legendary skills. Great, I already have one. Then we followed the process to put rare concuss on the familiar and then legendary concuss on it. Easy peasy. Then we convert using familiars with savior and any qualities concuss until we get the familiar we want. That should be easy. Let me check the market for savior and concuss familiars. Let's see. We'll need 2 of them for each conversion. That only gives us a 40% chance to get savior. Then we'll need another dozen or so to make sure we get prescience. Yeah, this isn't happening. Okay, new plan. We'll create an amalgam ash sweeper with 3 legendary skills. Then we'll place a rare concuss and then a legendary concuss on it. Then we'll convert as many times as possible with inexpensive familiars with concuss until we get savior and prescience. Why am I saying we need 3 legendary skills on the familiar? Remember my rule of thumb. Count the number of legendary skills you want on your end familiar. If you want 4 or more skills, or if one of the skills you want can only appear as a legendary, add 1 to the count. In this case, we want 2 skills, but Savior is a legendary only skill, so we add 1 to the count and get 3. And now you can see the reason for this rule of thumb. When we have 3 legendary skill slots, but 1 slot is taken up by concuss, that leaves only 2 legendary slots for Savior to show up in. That means there will be a 7.5% chance on each conversion for Savior to appear. That's hard, but doable. If there was only 1 available slot for Savior to show up in, there would only be a 3.8% chance for that to happen on each conversion, which for me is way too low of odds. Obviously, having even more potential legendary slots for Savior to appear in would be even better, if you're able to get a familiar with more legendary skills. So, we have an amalgam ash sweeper with 2 legendary skills on it. To gain an additional legendary skill, we'll convert with another familiar with 3 legendary skills. The Quake Strider in this case. Right now we don't care what the skills actually are, just the number of skills. Now that we have our 3 legendary skill amalgam ash sweeper, we can move on to step 2, getting a legendary concuss on the familiar. Our first step will be to try to get a rare version of concuss on the familiar before we move on to the legendary version. This shouldn't be a problem. I will now pause for 15 seconds so that you can identify the problem. If you thought, wait, there isn't a rare skill slot on the familiar for the rare concuss to go to, ding ding ding, you're a winner. Now, in my defense, I did realize that, which is why I had planned to convert the ash sweeper with 2 junk familiars, figuring it would be relatively easy to get at least 1 rare skill to show up. Okay, maybe it won't be quite as easy as I thought it would be. Well, that was a waste of 30 conversion stones. So, as all gamblers know, if you make a bad bet, double down on it, right? So I decided to convert again, and this time with 2 familiars with rare concuss. My thinking, such as it was that if a rare slot did show up, then I could get rare concuss on it at the same time, and I'd be back on schedule. And who knows, maybe concuss will randomly roll in one of the legendary skill slots. Okay, maybe not. Fine, let's restart. Convert with 2 junk familiars to get a rare skill slot to show up. Oh, good grief. Fine, it's time to employ the nuclear option. I'll convert using a familiar with legendary concuss. I'll only have a 40% chance of this working, but if it works, we can skip the rare concuss step and get back on track. Well, that didn't work. So I went to the market and found one more familiar with legendary concuss for a reasonable price. At this stage, I hit a point of despair. I had farmed conversion stones, platinum, and hunted bargains on the market for a long time to make this video to show how easy it is to make cool familiars, and I had spent 150 conversion stones without making a lick of progress. I figured I'd have to postpone the video another month while I farmed up more materials. So I just said forget it. I'm going to convert with my remaining rare concuss familiars and see if I could at least get something for all this work. I hope I've made it clear that this is not what you should do. At this stage, I should explain with the benefit of hindsight what's going on. I learned afterwards that this is the weighted table that the game rolls on to determine the quality of the output familiar. As you can see, we're here at 3 legendary and 0 rare skills. If we use conversion stones, and if the game rolls anything equal to or worse than what we already have, it will default to the current 3 legendary, 0 rare skill quality familiar. Now, if you add up all of these probabilities, you'll see that there's a 97% chance to get a 3 legendary, 0 rare output familiar, and only a 3% chance to get anything better, like say a 3 legendary 1 rare skill familiar. So it's totally reasonable that I could convert 7 times like I have and not improve the quality of the skills on my familiar at all. I'm just going to keep going. You have got to be kidding me. Concuss and Savior and Tenacity, which I wasn't even targeting. No prescience trait, but still. New plan. Create an amalgam ash sweeper with 3 legendary skills. Then flail around like a cat caught in a paper bag, converting randomly.
Wookie, kata, Wookie, Wookie, Wookie.
Then get insanely lucky and you'll be all set. Alright, it's time to run some numbers, figure out what I really want, and find out what it would cost to get it. I have several options to consider. The first option is that I can just accept what I have. After all, there's a great PvP familiar that's probably better than 95% of PvP familiars being used. I'm sure I could link to it in chat and get lots of oohs and ahs, and of course it's the cheapest option since I already have it. However, almost all of its strength comes from its skills, and every time Savior triggers and goes on a cooldown, those skills might as well not exist. Because of that, PvP familiars spend a lot of their time with their skills disabled. On the other hand, the prescience trait never goes on cooldown. A full discussion of familiar traits is beyond the scope of this video. As I previously mentioned, I hope to have a traits video published before Winds of Winter comes out. But for our present purpose, all you need to know is that having 4 legendary familiars with the legendary prescience trait gives you 6% reduced damage taken from players. If my Ash Sweeper provides the 5th legendary prescience, that number jumps to 9% reduced damage taken from players. That's a full 3% gain that will never go on cooldown. And the damage reduction versus player stat is one of those stats that gets stronger the more of it that you have. The second option is to stick with the original plan. Keep converting with familiars with rare concuss and hope that both Savior and Prescience appear at the same time. On each conversion, there will be an 80% chance of keeping concuss, a 7.5% chance of Savior appearing, and an approximately 20% chance that Prescience, that's powered by Resilience, Ash Sweeper's primary attribute, will appear. I'll explain this math in the traits video, just trust me on the numbers for now. Combined, that gives a 1.2% chance of working per conversion attempt, or in other words, it would take 57 conversions like this just to have a break-even chance of this working. I do have one advantage though. I have a familiar with double legendary attributes, my Pride and Joy Skitterwhite. Familiars with double legendary attributes are exceedingly rare, and I'm extremely lucky to have gotten one a long time ago. You can shop for them on the market, but they will be very expensive. The benefit of having a double legendary attribute pet is that if Prescience come up as being powered by the Ash Sweeper's secondary attribute, Ferocity, then I can transfer the double legendary attributes to my Ash Sweeper and take advantage of it. So for me, the odds of a useful version of Prescience appearing doubles to 40%. So now the conversions would have a 2.4% chance of working, requiring a mere 28 conversions just to have a break-even chance of getting the familiar I want. Yeah, that's completely out of reach for me. So how about we forget Concuss? As much as I like it, let's face it, it'll be on cooldown most of the time. Let's just focus on getting Savior and Prescience and call it a day. In this plan, we're going to convert with 2 junk familiars each time, which will be cheaper and will allow Savior a third legendary skill slot to show up in. The odds of Savior rises to 10.7%. If you only have single legendary attribute familiars, then the combined odds of getting both Savior and a useful version of Prescience will be 2.1%, meaning you'll need to convert 32 times to have a break-even chance of this working. If you have a double legendary attribute familiar to use, then the combined odds rises to 4.2%, requiring 16 conversions to have a 50% chance of success. That's 480 conversion stones and 32 junk familiars for a break-even chance of success. That's something that can be done as a part of a months-long project. You could use a Savior version of the familiar in Battlegrounds while quietly rolling for Prescience as conversion stones roll in, but that's still a lot of resources to use. The final option would be to also forget Concuss, but this time convert with 2 input familiars that have Savior on them. Savior pets used as input food can be an expensive option, and prices vary wildly from server to server. On my server, the prices currently hover around the 60,000 platinum mark, so we're talking about spending 120,000 platinum for every conversion. However, because all 3 familiars have Savior, there's an 80% chance that Savior will appear on the output familiar. If, like me, you have a double legendary attribute pet, then there would be a 32% chance of getting both Savior and Prescience on the pet. This means only 2 conversions are needed for a break-even chance of this working. As much platinum as this could add up to, this plan has the benefit that you won't need to run as many conversions, and therefore you won't need nearly as many conversion stones. At this point, I was looking to pack it in. I was going to choose option number 1, keeping the familiar as is, and then maybe try for Prescience again in a month or so while I farm some platinum. But then I checked the market for prices on Savior pets and my jaw dropped. Someone had just listed a Savior pet with Concuss at the going rate for Savior pets on my server. All of the other Savior and Concuss familiars were ridiculously expensive, so I couldn't get another one. But I also saw this familiar with a pack mule trait. I couldn't pass up this opportunity, so I sold a bunch of stuff and scraped together the platinum I needed to buy them. I only had enough platinum for one shot at this, but this is the reason why I was cautiously excited. I had an 80% chance of getting Savior and a 40% chance of getting Prescience as normal. But I would also have a 40% chance to get Concuss and a 25% chance to get the Pack Mule utility trait. Those 2 things wouldn't be strictly necessary, but they would be nice to have. It's time to hit the button and see what comes of it. Oh, wow. Savior and Concuss. Rare Precision increases the critical hit chance of the familiar, which means Concuss will proc more often. Nice of the game to finally give me some rare skills. And of course Prescience. It's powered by Ferocity, Ash Sweeper's secondary trait, so I'll have to move the double legendary attributes over. That's fine. Those of you who know how traits work know that I dodged a bullet by not getting Pack Mule in this case. Let's look at what we accomplished here. We created an Amalgam Ash Sweeper defensive PvP familiar with Savior, Concuss, and the Prescience trait that brings my damage reduction from players to 9%. We also created a legendary Lingering Wounds and Tenacity Skitterwhite with rare Soul Shield that I sold on the market for 300,000 platinum. I probably should have tried for more. And finally, we upgraded my Skitterwhite to have Savior on top of the already existing legendary Lingering Wounds, Soul Shield, and Tenacity. In this video, we've talked about how the familiar build process works and went through many examples. In this final section, I'll summarize how to build some of the most common endgame familiars. If you've enjoyed this video or found it useful, please subscribe to the channel and like, comment on, and share the video. It helps tremendously. If you want to create a good PvP defensive familiar, start by creating an Amalgam Ash Sweeper with at least 3 legendary skills. Convert with junk familiars until you get Savior. A 3 legendary skill familiar will have a break-even chance of getting Savior in 6 conversions. The fact that it took me 9 conversions to get it was a small stroke of bad luck. At that point, you can choose to stop and be happy, or you can convert with Savior input pets until you get both Savior and Prescience. Don't stress too much about targeting other perfect legendary skills, unless you have a lot of resources to spend on it. To create a really good PvE familiar that just uses common skills, create an Amalgam Skitterwhite with at least 3 legendary skills. Then follow the instructions in the section titled Placing Common Skills on Familiars to get legendary Lingering Wounds, Soul Shield, and Tenacity. There's another PvE familiar that's even better if you play a character who fights in melee range. It's an Amalgam Brutalon with Purification Flame, Lingering Wounds, and Soul Shield. To make one, create an Amalgam Brutalon with at least 4 legendary skills. Then follow the directions in the section titled Placing Common Skills on Familiars to get legendary Lingering Wounds and Soul Shield on it. After that, convert with familiars that have Lingering Wounds and Soul Shield of any quality on them. You'll need to run 14 of these conversions to have a 50% chance of getting Purification Flame while keeping legendary Lingering Wounds and Soul Shield. Finally, there's a quirky offensive PvP option, a Varrock with Forest Rage, Concuss, and Tenacity. This build has the shortest cooldown time possible for any familiar. Forest Rage will remove buffs from enemy players, while Concuss will frequently stun them. Notice that despite being a PvP build, it doesn't have Savior on it. You don't want the Varrock skills to be disabled. To make one, create an Amalgam Varrock with at least 4 legendary skills. Follow the directions in the section titled Placing Common Skills on Familiars to get legendary Concuss and Tenacity. Then convert with inexpensive familiars with Concuss and Tenacity of any quality. You'll need to run 14 of these conversions to have a break-even chance of getting Forest Rage and legendary Concuss and Tenacity. Thanks for watching the video. Please subscribe to the channel. We're on our way to 1 million subscribers. I mean, we haven't gone very far yet, but we are on the way.